Aloha, beautiful. Welcome to the Woman Unleashed online retreat. My name is Amber Quile Malani Benici, and I'm your retreat host. And I'm excited today. So today we're going to talk about not just vision, but practice, right? So, here's the thing. I know you know what it's like to have an idea or a vision or a dream, and there's this, but then the actual implementation or making it happen, there's some gap there. The gap. So we're talking today about the gap and those things that sometimes kind of feel like hurdles or blocks that keep you from taking action. We're looking at how to move those things, how to just kind of shift that energy so that you can keep moving, so that you can develop practice on what you want to vision. So I'm excited today. We're going to hang out today with Kelly Blaser. Kelly, say hi.
Hello. Excited to be here.
Yay, Kelly! So I'm going to introduce Kelly more thoroughly in a moment, but let's do what we always do. Just get present, right? So have your Woman Unleashed journal and your coloring goodies, so you're ready to take notes, and let's get really open to receive, so you can really be ready for what you're meant to get today. Okay? So with me, if you'll just close your eyes for a moment and notice any energy, things that have been going on from earlier that are on your mind. Inhaling in and exhale and release. Next, noticing if there's anything in the future that's pulling you ahead of this moment. Come back here. Inhale in. Exhale and release. And third and final breath, smelling this moment together. And release. When you're ready, you can open your eyes with me so I can introduce you to Kelly. So Kelly, she is the founder of Dharma Bridge, and she's a licensed marriage family therapist with an emphasis on Buddhism, Shiva Tantra, and somatic psychology. So she's got some really cool tools in her medicine basket here, right? So her programs really focus on the power of applying Dharma to one's life. And we can talk about Dharma. It's interesting, Dharma. Well, wait, this can be a side tangent. We could really go off on with just Dharma in general, which we might talk a little bit about. But Dharma in Hawaiian tradition is your kuleana, your sacred responsibility, right? There's some of that, yeah. And so she helps people really train themselves in meditation and mindfulness practices, in compassionate self-inquiry, right? Because we all know what it's like to beat ourselves up, right? Not that kind. So compassionate self-inquiry, so that you can have freedom, right? From those thoughts in your mind that keep you stuck and rigid, and that can open you up to possibility. And so that's what Kelly does. But today she's here. So welcome, Kelly.
Thank you. I'm excited. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you. I kind of wish I were in Hawaii with you, but this is awesome too. So yeah, I've been doing a lot of work on vision lately, and really delving into that with my group and with my lists. And so it's really alive for me, just understanding what is it that drops us into vision, what is it that helps us to refine our vision, and what is it that gets in the way of vision, and how can we attend to that? So I love that you brought up, how do we mind the gap, which kind of reminds me of being on the tube in London. They've got those big signs all over the place that say mind the gap. They're referring to the gap.
Yeah, I totally know exactly what you're talking about. Yep, mind, don't fall in the crack, in other words.
Right, which is essentially what we're looking at today. And so I want to take us really specifically into these tantric teachings around understanding the different ways that, according to the Tantra, we can get locked. And just because I know you guys work a lot with your little sketchbooks and with art, and really and it's a huge part of my work as well, I want you guys to just start with your notebook. I want you to draw a picture of yourself, and it can be whatever. It could be, I would probably draw myself in a meditative posture, because a lot of the work that we're going to talk about is, pertains to how we work within a meditative space. But you can draw it however you want, as long as it has your head, your heart, and your will center. So your navel center, sometimes they call it the lower dantian, your will center at the navel. Okay, so it's got to include your head, your heart, and your will center. Draw a picture. Okay, and then you can start. You can keep just kind of sketching as I'm laying this out, right? And I just want to give you a little bit of framework so that the practice helps you to so that you can really access something within this practice. Creative energy is actually the creative energy of all consciousness. So when we tap into creativity, we are the expression of the divine. Like we are essentially, we're just another locus of consciousness. We are no separate from the divine. The divine is running all through us, and in that space we have total creative freedom, right? Which sounds great, but part of the understanding of the Tantra is that one of our freedoms is also to forget ourselves. And that's where our pain and our suffering happens, is our capacity to forget who we are. Is like, you cannot take ultimate freedom away from the divine or away from the self. So there's nothing wrong with the fact that we can forget ourselves, but it is where our pain resides, is our self-forgetfulness. And when I mean self-forgetfulness, what I mean is like our tendency to forget that we are part of an interdependent web of beings, our tendency to forget that we are the divine, our tendency to forget that we are beautiful, our tendency to forget that we are loved, our tendency to forget that we are whole, which for most of us happens in the space of, limiting beliefs or stories that we tell ourselves, but sometimes it also happens just in really difficult sensations in the body, deep sorrows. And sometimes it happens in the form of disease or illness. There's all kinds of different ways that suffering can arise, and you've seen it, if you've been on the planet for more than a few minutes, you've seen it, because you get to be the mirror that reflects all of humanity as well. So you're intimate with all of these different ways that we suffer. So in the Tantra, first of all, it's actually not a problem that the suffering arises, as long as we know how to attend to it and use the suffering as a way to move ourselves back into freedom. So basically, you can think of it, anytime you're in a place of suffering, as long as you have the willingness and the tools and the community support, we call Sangha, to move toward it, you can actually use it to liberate yourself even more thoroughly, because that is, you are at your essence that liberated wholeness. And then in doing that, you end up becoming like of service to anyone else who's ever been stuck. So that's the other like incredible fringe benefit of moving through your suffering, is that if you track it, like if you really pay attention and you're willing to remember what your journey was, then you end up being of service to anybody else who's stuck, right? So as I said a little moment ago, like ultimate creative freedom is the nature of divine consciousness. And we usually, like when we're really in beautiful creative energy and there's love running through it, we feel it, right? Like in Chinese medicine, they say that creativity is the antidote to fear. And that's, that's kidney energy according to Chinese medicine, which is also kind of interesting because it's like right at the back of the solar plexus center, in a sense. Like go from the navel center, go back, you're gonna find your kidneys. So, and we're gonna work a lot with the navel center in the practice that we do. But I digress, which is my tendency. But so anyway, our ultimate creative freedom is our essence nature. And then we get stuck in these three specific ways according to the Tantra. And they are basically your head, your heart, or your navel. So that's why I had you put that down on paper, right? Because I want you to sort of think about what are the different ways that I tend to get stuck. So according to the Tantra, and let me just ask you, Amber, is this all clear so far?
No, it's really good, but I think that there are people that probably don't know what the Tantra is.
Okay.
There's just something, if we can just do a little bit of a grounding piece of the Tantra, and in the space of like, this is sacred ancient teaching. It's been around for gazillions of years. And so we have access to this ancient teaching. Yeah. So there's some of that. I think that there might be people that are like, I don't even know what Tantra is. And or Tantra in their mind is like sacred sexual stuff that's like crazy. And so, so if we can like.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. So that's actually super important because there's a really big differentiation between Neo-Tantra and Classical Tantra. And I don't have any problem with either. Like, I don't know that much about Neo-Tantra. I know a little bit about it. But, and I'm sure a lot of people get a lot of liberation, a lot of healing around their sexuality, which is so important. So, you know, all blessings to those who practice Neo-Tantra. I'm really talking about classical Tantra, which are these, the teachings that came from, like, probably, it started, I think the movement started around like 800, and then the peak was 1300, but I don't want to go into the details too much because we'll get wacky scholarly, but there's been a lot of overlap with Tantric Buddhism as well, and a lot of overlap with, like, I mean, these traditions kind of cross-pollinated, you know. So I'm mostly referring back to when I go into more the practice here, I'm referring back to those classical teachings, and specifically from Shaivism, which was, you know, it's from Kashmir, really, really long time ago. And the practices are really beautiful. And there's so many cool things I could say about the tantric teachings. And I just want to say one, which is, I think, so important because we're women. And because a lot of these spiritual traditions basically excluded women, or if they didn't exclude women, they didn't give women access to any leadership roles. And they also didn't really address the experience of being a householder. Like a lot of the traditions, like Buddhism in particular, there are many different teachings from Buddhism that really came out of monastic, like renunciate tradition. So they're not actually all that applicable to like somebody like me who's got a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old and, like, you know, like intense family life and everything. So, you know, a lot of those teachings don't really land for me quite as well as the traditions from the Shakta, which is the goddess-centered tradition, and the Shaiva Tantra. And one of these teachings is that everything is perfect and we can forget ourselves. And when we forget ourselves, we tend to forget ourselves in one of these 3 ways: at the head, at the heart, or at the navel. So the ways that we forget ourselves let me start with the heart, because this is like the root way that we forget ourselves. And they call it anava mula. So anava mula comes from the root, which is anu, which actually means like separate. So anava mula is like this pain at the heart when we feel separate, when we feel like separate from the divine, when we feel separate from each other, when we feel alone, when we feel like unsupported. And in the quality of that pain is really like, it's really at the heart. It's like, you know, sorrow, depression, that kind of pain. And what tends to happen is it's scary. It's really unpleasant to be intimate with that heart pain, because it provokes this feeling of incredible insecurity. You know, so if you've ever had, you know, paranoia or like painful insecurity, you know how bad you want to get away from that feeling, right? It is just so, it's a dismal feeling, right? So we tend to move into the head and create an analysis of what's going on. And that can be helpful because, you know, the mind can be a powerful tool, but it can also create another layer of suffering. And that's what's referred to as Maya Mala. So the kind of suffering that gets created in the analytical mind around like comparing ourselves to others, you know, feeling less than or feeling better than others and feeling disconnected from others because we can't accept their faults or, you know, or their ineptitudes or the ways that they have betrayed us, but then analyzing it all, overthinking it all, that's the domain of Maya Mala. And then what often happens out of Maya Mala is this movement into, I just have to come up so you can see, this movement into the center of will. So the lower dantian, the navel center, it's associated with the 3rd chakra from the classical yoga teachings. You know, that's our will center. So that's our power center. So sometimes in order to get away from the pain that we experience in our heart and then in our head, we want to move into action, we want to do something about it, right? And this is not necessarily a bad thing. Like when we're in alignment, it's critical that we do something about it. I mean, this is what creative energy calls forth in us, is this capacity to move forward, right? But if we move into action from a place of like trying to put armor on rather than trying to get more connected to the truth and get free, then we can just put ourselves into more shackles, you know, and more isolation. So that's how the Tantra looks at it, right? It's a little bit stacked, like heart pain is the most uncomfortable. So we move into the head, and then we tend to move into action from there. So what I want you guys to think about as you're listening to this is like, where do you tend to get stuck? Because there's actually a process by which you can disentangle that, like by specifically seeing it, so that even as you move through your world, you can kind of, edit as you go along and course correct and get free, and just every time you get caught, turn back in to the truth of who you really are, right? And also know that it's not like you are not unique in this. I mean, I think that's the other thing to remember is like when we get caught in suffering, we often feel like really isolated, like there's something deeply wrong with us. We're so psychologized, like Western psychology has gotten into our heads in some good and also some bad ways, but people can tend to then like, diagnose themselves, kind of apply this disease model to the self and get really self-critical and all of that. So what's cool about this practice is like, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. Like people have been looking at these tendencies for such a long time. And that in and of itself should be evidence of the fact that like, there's nothing wrong with you. You're perfect. And these are just the ways that we have forgotten ourselves. And it's just force of habit. And we can get free. And so according to the Tantra, the way that we really get free is by accessing the center. That's what they call it, like coming into the central channel. So that's the practice that we're going to do.
Before we go to that practice, I noticed that the heart one was the Anavalmalta. I'm sorry, the Anavalmala, and then the head was the Maya Mala. Was there, when we move into the will center, was there a name for that one?
Yeah, it's called Karma Mala. So karma means action, or cause and effect. Like it really technically means action. Thank you.
I just know that I know that, sister, you're out there going like, what was the name of the third one? Don't worry.
I know.
I gotcha.
Yeah, so you guys, hopefully you can write that down. We will also, one of the things we're providing, if you want your free gift, is an explanation of this. So you'll get to there's a video that kind of explains it a little bit better, even I think that I'm doing right now, and some resources, including a quiz to help you to kind of figure out what mula you are most caught in, right? So, but just as we're sitting together, and you can probably feel in to where your energy gets the most stuck, and also know that they really bounce off of each other and bleed into each other, so it's a little bit hard to differentiate sometimes, but we do have tendencies, we have certain proclivities, like certain people are so in their heads and they're hyper analytical, and that's their strength, but it also is their greatest weakness, so we want to figure out how to balance ourselves. That's the beauty of practice. And also, as I said, like learning this about yourself can help you to move through your world, navigate your world in a way where you return to wholeness more easily. But also when you start a meditation practice, it's really the deepest medicine, because in a meditation practice where you're training yourself to return to the center, in my experience, we just get profoundly unhooked through this practice. We get profoundly in touch with this love consciousness that moves through the central channel, that is the truth of who we are. And it's really like the healing happens almost all on its own. So you don't have to get it right. And even when the mind doesn't understand what's happening, even when the mind is still in a fetter, it's still like the healing is always happening. Like we're always, the metaphor for me is like, I think about this as the way that all water returns to the ocean. All water knows where it's going. And all of us, like no matter how much friction we've got in our lives or how much trauma we've been through or how much confusion we even have in our minds, we are ultimately returning to love consciousness, returning to source. But there are ways to kind of put banks on that river so that it moves to the ocean more easily. And one of the important banks is practice, spiritual practice. You know, one of the important banks is Sangha, spiritual community. One of the important banks is the teachings of the Dharma. And should I go into that just really briefly?
Yeah.
Okay. So just one quick thing about the Dharma. So Dharma is often translated as law, or, I mean, you said, Amber, that in the Hawaiian tradition, it's sacred responsibility. So it can be certainly interpreted that way. But what it really means, and this is important to me, is if you look at it etymologically, like the root of the word dharma, from the DHR of the of dharma actually means support. So the truth is, like, the banks of the river tell the river where to go because they're supporting it in getting back to the ocean. So it's just really important to remember that, because sometimes we can feel like constrained by the idea of responsibility. But the truth is that that responsibility then feeds us into the difficulties that we are here to clear so that we can get free and experience our essence nature. You know, like, I know you have children, Amber, I have children, like, they are a sacred responsibility. And I don't love it every day. I'm not going to lie. Like, there are days where it's not so pretty, but ultimately, like, what happens that makes it not pretty is mostly happening at the level of my resistance, you know. And so every time it's difficult, it feeds me into my resistance, into greater intimacy with the ways that I get caught in my own mind, heart, and will center. And then I get the opportunity to disentangle those knots and come back into the freedom of the central channel, you know, like letting go and letting goddess, you know, or what have you. So I just wanted to say that about Dharma. I think it's really important to remember that it's a support.
I love it. So now it's like looking at, like, okay, noticing the places where we're stuck. So we have this idea, noticing now, like, okay, where is that place that you tend to get stuck the most? And then it's like coming back to center, or returning to center. And so how do we do that?
Okay, well, so on a moment by moment basis, there are practices that I could give you. But first, I want to give you something that's more about just what we can do in our meditation practice in order to get access to the central channel. Because in truth, I think that is the deepest tool, like developing the discipline of for me, a sitting practice. But it can be, I mean, really, it can be any embodiment practice. And I know that, you know, your people are really into art, and I am too. I'm like obsessed with art, actually. And my experience is that there's nothing like meditation practice to unleash our creativity, because what happens is we end up first of all tapping into that love consciousness that stabilizes us emotionally, so that we actually can, you know, sustain the discipline of creation. And also so that we can like really let the most beautiful things rise up out of us, you know, because it's easy to be a tortured artist as well, but it doesn't necessarily free us, you know. So, you know, we get to deal with our shadow, and it's important part of the artistic process, is like understanding what the contents of the shadow are. I mean, they say, like, ignore your shadow at your own peril, but also, like, our meditation practice is what, at least for me, has just allowed me to also trust the beauty of this life experience, and let that be what rises up, you know, what rises up to the fore, and that's kind of where I land and recognize who I actually am, you know. So there are a lot of different practices that I work with. Like, I do a lot of work with metta meditation, loving kindness meditation, and also a lot of work with Tonglen, which is actually a Tibetan Buddhist practice. But the one that I want to talk about right now is just, it's really an amazing practice because it's actually so quick. Like, what we can drop into the central channel really quickly. So we can do a 5-minute practice here, and it can really help us to settle. And what I want you guys to think about as we're doing this, I mean, I'm going to be telling you how to move your breath, where to focus your attention. I'm going to be telling you how to retain your breath, like where to hold your breath in and hold your breath out. But I also want you to be just noticing, like, what is the stuff that comes up in your mind, in your heart, in your body? You know, are you noticing the stuff of anavamala? Are you noticing like grief and insecurity? Because it's not a problem. It's actually wonderful. I actually think that when you access your insecurity, you are so close to freedom. You know, it's the first mullah. So in some ways, like, those are precious, precious moments. It's quite a bit harder actually to deal, in a sense. It's much harder to deal with the stuff of the mind, the ways that we suffer at the level of mind, you know, comparison, all the rigid beliefs and such. They're in some ways, they're, at least in my experience, they're not as uncomfortable as root level insecurity, but because they're not super, super uncomfortable, they're a little harder to break free of. So, but just notice, are you feeling it in your heart? Are you getting caught in your head, comparison, what have you? Or are you getting like this will level frustration? Or sometimes the karma mala energy is more, it's like, you know that you really should be going and doing something right now. And it'll be hard for you to sit because you're like, I have 10,000 things I could do. Which is like exciting, right? Because we want to move into, if we have the energy to move into action, we want to move into action, that's great. But it can also be a prison if we start to think of our own worthiness as connected to what we do, because we are inherently worthy, regardless of what we think, regardless of what we do, regardless of what we feel. Our inherent worthiness is intact. So get yourself comfortable, because it's really important that you be comfortable, and it's really important that your spine be lifted. I mean, you can do this laying down, but it's not nearly as good. And we're just going to sit for 5 minutes. So what I want you to be aware of is right about this level, or I've got if you can't see me, if anybody's calling in, I have my hand like right at the diaphragm level, like just above the navel center. So you're going to, as you breathe, you're going to feel your diaphragm. It's like a big dome shaped muscle that separates your chest cavity from your abdominal cavity. So when you breathe in, your lungs expand, the dome-like muscle of your diaphragm has to contract and move down. Can you see that, Amber? Okay, so when it's relaxed, when your diaphragm's relaxed, it's like a dome rising up into your chest cavity. And as soon as your lungs inflate, it moves down. So that's what I want you to feel. You're going to feel your abdominal cavity expand a little bit. So as you breathe in, imagine that there's a full moon that you're drawing down to that navel center. And as your diaphragm contracts down into the navel center, notice that, feel the energy there. And if you're familiar with Mula Bandha, you can hold Mula Bandha for the yogis out there. It's just a contraction of the pelvic floor around the anus. You can hold that if you want. But just imagine a full moon coming down as you breathe in, as the lungs expand, the full moon's coming down to the navel center. Hold the breath in and keep imagining that energy at the navel center. And it's important that you don't like close your throat. You need to hold your breath in by holding the diaphragm in place, right? And then as you exhale, imagine energy rising up the spine, up the central channel, and imagine it as a sun rising up. So you're inhaling the moon down, holding, exhaling the sun up, holding the breath out. Inhaling, so you can start at any time, okay? Your spine is long, don't close your eyes. Take your attention in. As you inhale, you're bringing the moon down the central channel, holding at that navel center, holding the breath in. And then as you exhale, relaxing, letting the energy of the sun rise up. And let the breath move gently and follow the pace of your own breathing. Moving your awareness through the central channel. you get caught in the mind at all, just keep bringing yourself back. Noticing where the mind goes, noticing the energy of it, not getting lost in the content, noticing the energy of the mind. Bringing yourself back into awareness of the somatic experience, your physical body, all of your sensations, and your breath. And as the breath is being drawn in, imagine the moon, millions of moonbeams illuminating the whole of the central channel and coming down toward the navel center, holding the breath in, holding that kind of dynamic tension at the navel center. And then every time you exhale, just softening and noticing energy rising up through that central channel. And if you're a visual person, you can imagine the sun rising up. Bringing our attention into the central channel, letting the breath carry us in. The retention of the breath is really important. So draw the breath all the way in, hold the breath in, let the breath all the way out, hold the breath out. Bring the breath all the way in, energy moving down the spine. Hold the breath in. Very gently. Release the breath out. Hold the breath out. And not to the extent that you feel short of breath. If you feel short of breath, you can always just take a couple of catch breaths where you don't do the retention part of the breath. Just be here for a few more moments. And I want you to just imagine that you're letting divine energy, goddess energy, Buddha, nature, however you like to think of it, letting God in fully into your central channel. Coming into remembrance again of that infinite freedom, infinite creative freedom that you are, because you are that source energy yourself. And once you get some feeling of being in connection with that, some hit of remembrance of your deep nature as source, then just ask yourself, where is it I'm getting caught? Am I getting caught in my head, in my heart, in my navel center? Which of these mullahs is most clouding my life force? And even more importantly than discerning where, ask yourself, am I willing to let that go and come back into remembrance? And can I let that go without in any way making it wrong that I've been stuck like this? See if you can just open up to this experience of radical acceptance of all of it, even the forgetfulness. And through that radical acceptance, move back into remembrance. And then whenever you're ready, I want you to go ahead and open your eyes and grab your journal and just make any notes or draw anything that came through for you around any clarity that might have come through around the ways that you tend to get stuck. And then also, if you were able to tap into this willingness to come back into remembrance, I want you to just write down, like, what would that mean? And what would I then create out of that willingness? What would that mean? What would I then create out of that willingness? And if something, comes through for you, I want you to move into creation mode. Even if it feels scary, like active faith today, move yourself into that mode of creation that becomes possible when you find the willingness to drop into remembrance of your own true nature. Now, I like to do a formal meditation practice, but even if you don't like to do a formal meditation practice, the next time you even just have a moment to sit and close your eyes and drop in, try to take just a couple minutes to do that practice and see, just watch how it grounds you. I mean, it's amazingly healing for the nervous system as well. How was that for you?
I really loved the visual of the sun and the moon. I haven't, like, the rising and the setting, like that color, that was super cool. I haven't done anything like that before. And it took me a little bit, because for some reason, like, I wanted to do the opposite. Like, I felt like, I don't even know, like, letting the sun come in and then the moon, it was like, I keep like, oh no, we're doing the other thing. But then it was cool, because I felt like I was like out of sync, and then something happened where it kind of synced up a little bit. So that was cool.
You may have heard that Hatha yoga, like Hatha is usually the physical branch of yoga. Hatha means sun moon yoga. So it actually is borrowed from this tradition, which predates it. And then another thing that can be confusing sometimes is that people think of, all right, I'm inhaling, so there's a rising, and I'm exhaling and then deepening. But just think about it in terms of, like, that's why I want people to focus on the diaphragm, because you can feel the diaphragm moving down into the abdominal cavity, and it helps you to visualize energy moving down. So play with that. I hope that's helpful. And I really would love for people to, if they go to this page that we're going to send you to and opt in, they get to take this quiz to kind of help them to sort out which of the mullahs is most at play for them. And in the process of taking the quiz, we actually kind of explain what the mullahs are. So it's an interesting little experience. So
Awesome.
Learning quiz, yeah.
So ladies, if you are are connecting to this practice and you're like, oh, that's really interesting, but I want to kind of know more about it, or like which of the malas like stops me, and like how to kind of work with that more deeply, like this is perfect for you, like this quiz. So you can just go ahead and find the link right here below here, and we can go there. And then the other thing I'd love for you to share is in the Facebook group, I would love, I'm inviting you to share which one of the malas shows up for you that you've noticed just from our explanation. And if there was something, any ahas or things that came up for you during the meditation practice, like what shifted for you? Is there something that came up, anything in that that you're feeling like willing to, move into now and move into action about? Would love to hear that. So you can share that in the Facebook group. But thank you so much, Kelly. This has been awesome.
Thank you, Amber. Such a delight. Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions too. If anybody, I'll be in that Facebook group and kind of check it out. If anybody wants to hear back from me about any of this, please tag me, and I would be happy to exchange some love in there.
Yeah. So if you're noticing things are going and you're ready to shift and move through some stuff, and if this is also just as resonating, like if you're feeling like, oh, this is cool, like I'm feeling connected to this, like Kelly's your girl. So thanks, Kelly. I'm glad you're gonna be in there. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope to get to support people. You know, that's what I do. That's what my program Dharma Bridge is all about. That, you know, it's starting right about the time that this interview will be aired. So if anyone is interested in learning more, working more deeply with me, I would love to support them.
Awesome. All righty, ladies. Well, sending you lots of love, and we'll see you at our next session. Have a good one. Bye now.